Welcome to the festival's Regulars Table on Masculinity. Nice to see you. My name is Dominik Djialeu. I'm the host of this panel discussion.
We will hold this conversation in German, so if you need a translation, there will be translation sets. So there will be a headset, so feel free to order one. Ja. Stammtisch zur Männlichkeit. Nochmal kurz zu meiner Person.
Well, festival's Regulars Table on Masculinity. Dominik Djialeu is my name. I'm the moderator. I'm also a podcaster of Barbecue, the Black Brown Queer Report, and vice versa. 2 languages, 1 story that we produce together with Deutschlandfunk Kultur and the Goethe-Institut. And therefore, the circle closes. I'm very happy to be the host on this panel discussion this morning, and I'll introduce my guests in a moment. Because this morning, before I came here, I was at the fitness studio. I don't know if you are doing some workout at the studio. I think it's always exciting to go there. I love to watch people, observe people, especially men at that place, not because I'm gay, but that's a different story altogether, because I love to see the behavior of men at the fitness studio during workout, and this is quite interesting. The place where I go, it is very often a very aggressive, testosterone-loaded mood. Nobody talks to nobody. Everybody's too cool to talk to the person working out next to him, and you're feeling that they could start beating each other up at any point in time. But when you then happen to talk to these people, these weird characters, difficult to judge, when you start talking to them, I usually find, wow, they are actually quite nice. And then I wonder, why do men need that? Why do they need to go to workout studios and sort of present themselves in this macho, masculine manner? Isn't that outdated? We are having this sort of debate these days in certain groups and circles, of course, and certain milieus. And then I hear from other parts of society that masculinity is in a crisis. What does that mean, I wonder? And maybe we'll find out during our panel discussion. And in order to find out, I've invited fabulous guests, female and male guests, on my right side or on your left side. The great Barbie Breakout. She is a podcaster of that fantastic podcast, Tragisch aber geil. Tragic but great. She is a drag queen, drag performer, TV show host, and activist, female activist. Welcome to this panel discussion. Hello. Then we have Fikri Anil Altintash. Welcome to you. You're political or civic educationalist. Her for she ambassador for UN Women for Germany. And you write about critical masculinity, and you are not an activist. That's what you say. Well, we'll come back to that in a moment. And last but not least, well, he deserves an applause, of course, Sir Mantis, producer and rapper. Welcome to all 3 of you here on stage. I've asked you to bring along songs. But no, first, stop. We've got fantastic drinks here. And first of all, we should, well, it's a regulars table. And of course, at a regulars table, you cannot talk without having a drink. So cheers, everybody. I stay seated. We are using the casual du in German, which is you in English. So we don't make that distinction in English. Well, I've asked you to bring along your songs. And we've already heard them when we came into the theater. I start with my song, Mina Loyal, Future Bay, a song that we have just heard, the last song we heard. And I found it fitting because this morning it fits the mood and the thoughts I had when I went to do my workout. And what is interesting is men are criticized in that song. Oh, obviously heterosexuals, cis men are criticized, and I'm a cis man as well, although in the song, they don't name the heterosexuals. I know that they mean heterosexuals, and I sort of exclude myself from that group. But it's interesting to see that I make the same observation, that as a gay man, a homosexual man, I can easily put myself in the shoes of someone who can understand how fatiguing toxic masculinity is. And that's why I have selected that song. And now I'm most interested in the songs that you want to share with us. Not you, Samantha, as well, but you may have a song that you would like to name. Barbie, let's start with you. Well, the request to bring a song along came on a day when I was very busy. I didn't have much time to look into that, and the premises was that it's a song that describes me, but that has a sort of reference, or is a reference to my definition of masculinity, and I found that quite difficult. And after 2 hours of really thinking about that, I just selected a song which is meaningful for my drag, because I'm here as a drag queen. I was at the Hotel Timp. I don't know if you know that hotel. Travesty theater in Cologne, with a hotel building on top, with evening shows. I lived at Cologne. I went to that place with my friend, and there was a trans woman with lots of red hair that performed, and she performed that song. I was so touched by the intensity and the dignity and the despair and the pain and everything that was presented. And I was doing drag already at the time, but that I realized was what I can convey when I can get people along and touch them in their loneliness and their pain, and what is so painful, what we cannot really express otherwise. So maybe that would be a good tool for me, and that's why I selected that song. It was a very dramatic performance, so that's the reference to that song. Pretty Ricky Wine is what I selected. What you describe is not what I was thinking of, so otherwise I would have selected a different song. I came in and I said, well, yeah, Cisco, what a song that I listened to, well done, and then Pretty Ricky. And I remembered that when I was 13, 14, during that period in my life, when I had to give evidence of my masculinity and started to consume pornographies, and my buddies and I, we looked at that, and we said we should be like those in the video heterosexual sex, and we had a sort of old matches and said, well, as they do, we need to imitate the movements, and I practiced that, and that was the song. Well, and I said, well, that's probably quite fitting as food for thought. Well, I've got an image in my mind now. Well, of course. That's cute. I don't mind. Well, good that you have not selected Punk Song. Although I loved that song at the time long ago, but it would not be something that you would publish today, I think. Well, never say never. Semantis, what's the song that you would have selected for today if you had selected one? I know you're very busy. Well, I think I would not have been able to decide for any song, but I would like to give you some reference, because trans masculinities are a huge gap in music, and I do not have that one single song of cis-men that I associate masculinity with. It had never happened for me. It was actually something like a process of, cis men were sort of optically role models, but rather with regard to their behavior. And that is now changing. It's changing these days, these times, that I see some role models. And for me, trans masculinity from Canada, Montreal, there's a real queer scene of trans people, and in many cases they are anti-fas as well, anti-fascist. And this is what I had to look for a long time, and I found Black Casper. It's a trans masculine person, non-binary. A Big Dick Girl is a song where he honors the beauty of trans women and appreciates that. So really great songs in English and French, and I can only recommend to all of you to listen that Henry Maximilian Jacobs from Berlin is also great. Apart from that, well, yeah. A few people that are not outed in the rap scene. Well, leave them out then. Well, that's nice. And you said that, well, you were not really able to identify yourself with this man of that existed at the time in the rap and the music business, etc., or more generally speaking. So what about masculinity? What I associate with masculinity are things like strength, potency, and strong masculinity. Men are doers, healthy, strong, powerful. What does it do to you when you hear these terms for men, to characterize men? What sort of happens inside you? Can you identify with that as men? Well, for me, it was always sort of a concept. I'm out there, and I look inside from the outside looking in. So I didn't listen to that. I didn't understand these terms. For me, they didn't make sense to me because in my life, it was always women that were the very strong ones, that were really the tough ones, that really were enduring. So it was not an attribute for me, to be honest. Masculinity, I've experienced that for a very long time as very negative as a result of violence, etc. It was never something that I was striving for a very long time. It was complex for some time, and in the meantime, I have a feeling that, well, my female elements, my masculine elements, and everything in between have been reunited or united inside of me, but I don't really look into that topic of masculinity anymore. And instead, what are you looking at? Or you said, well, you have sort of united that, it has sort of been blended inside of you. You feel different. How do you feel? Well, I don't feel different. But I thought for a long time when I was a child, I perceived myself as a girl because everything I liked was liked by girls. My friends and I were one team, and my brothers, fathers, uncles, grandfathers were on the other side. They played waltz, played war, etc. And I detested that. I didn't like that. And logically, I thought, well, I am of that other team, the female team. And I was told, no, you're not. It's not. And I didn't like that. I was confused. And then the term trans entered my life. So I thought, well, am I trans? Do I have to be trans? Then for 10 or 15 years, I have tried to come to terms with that. And I have realized time and time again that this was not me either. It was not fitting for me. I was not born in the wrong body, which is the wrong terminology altogether. But that was not my truth. And then it was via drag that I found some relaxation. I had found an artistic form which allowed me to live these other elements of which society told me that it was not something I should live because it was not in line with my gender role. And then the gender the new terminology, when the term of non-binary entered my life, well, I said first I didn't want to be non-binary because they looked weird, they wear weird clothes, and I sort of thought of a look and not an identity thing about that. And then when I understood that, I said, well, it does only mean that you are neither 100% on one side, nor are you 100% on the other side. You're somewhere in between or somewhere totally else or on both sides. And then I thought, well, wow, that makes sense. It's meaningful, and the pressure has disappeared. That I don't have to prove anymore what I am. I'm just myself. I'm just me, and that's something I like. How do you think about that? Well, it's a sort of hate-love in terms of masculinity, that scientific term. I write about that, I think about it, and at the same time, I think that it sort of puts me into confined spaces and playing football and being physically active. Well, it's something I keep reproducing because it's still a sort of form of crass orientation. And I was asked, well, what do you still do today that manifests your masculinity? And I don't dare say, well, I love football. I love to sort of scream when I watch football, etc. And but then other things I like. What do you like? Eurovision Song Contest. I like. Well, seriously, well, I didn't get that acronym. Well, we know what that is. But the question is often asked because I feel, well, from my cis hetero perspective, I now start entering that mode to realize where I feel these ambivalences in my growing up, because there are also racist experiences and that have also influenced my masculinity. So I'm at that point now, I would say, where I say, well, I hate everything that is linked to that at the political, societal or economic level or perspective. But at the same time, I'm still in the midst of that process to find myself in that sort of cosmos. And it's still a search for orientation. I would tell a lie if I didn't tell you, well, that, try to be sort of have that masculine look when going to a party, etc. So I'm somewhere in between. I don't know exactly, ESC, and still try to look somewhat masculine. So what do these descriptions or do with you? Well, gender role, scientifically speaking, it's easy to analyze them, but socially or societally, it is crazy to re-change them. What does gender do? Why is it so good? Because it gives you a responsibility or a science responsibility and tells you what to do. And that's the difficult thing in that system. Why do you feel so uneasy to go out of that role? And if you grow into that role as a child, it's always an experience of violence, because parts of you are overstressed that may not be that important, that have to grow, like strengths, power, etc. And other parts are sort of pushed to the side, and that happens to each and every one of us at some point in life. And when we put that into a relation, it is always the question of how easily or difficultly we cope with that. And what was expected by us as boys, while I managed quite well, but I was not allowed to. And at the same time, I felt like every other boy in socialization that there are moments in time, for example, when beautiful things are destroyed. I found that horrible. To have a air balloon blast, that is something I hated. Things where I was not able to connect with other boys, because this affinity towards violence was then implemented towards things. And, well, sometimes even animals. And that was something I hated, that abhorred me. And so here I clearly felt, first I'm observed, and people try to find out what does that child do. And then there were talks, discussions, that I'm so much boyish. And then people didn't agree, isn't that great? Because women in our society need to show more strength, or isn't that not so good because women are not allowed to do that, and maybe the girl should work on her hair. Well, my hair, I've worked on my hair. I did quite a good job. And gender roles for me are something. Well, in my entire transition, I felt that for all of us, and no one can be out of that. It gives us a certain level of certainty, security, subtle moments. A girlfriend moves out, and I'm in front of her, and she expects that I coordinate how to take the canopy down the stairs. I was so not prepared for that. So it's an automatism. This is the dynamics that does simply exist. If women think that responsibility is too much, that has got to do with physicality, equation is okay, and like that. And I've remembered next time I did it, it worked out very, because I haven't learned it like that. And I've remembered next time I did it, it worked out very, because I haven't learned it like that. And I've remembered next time I did it, it worked out very, because I haven't learned it like that. And I've remembered next time I did it, it worked out very, because I haven't learned it like that. And I've remembered next time I did it, it worked out very well. So my experience with binarity is that these roles, because they do still exist, it is so difficult to get rid of them because everybody links responsibility to it. The division of activities is clear, and it gives a feeling of certainty or security to everybody, and that disappears the more the roles are sort of trickling away, and then you feel what you like, and because it's labeled this way or that way. And what socialization has also given you is that you may want to keep a few things and not allowed to. So this thing about gender is the process. Who are you as a person? What do you like as a person? That is what it includes, what it embraces. What do you link with gender here? What do you express as gender? And what is the space that you take on the gender level for yourself? Because per se, we feel that with the example of generations after us that grow up with non-binary or trans in a different way, with a different way of taking that for granted and accepting it as naturally. And I'm very curious to see how they will then divide up different tasks autonomously and how they take the canopy down the chairs. If they do it differently, then we've been able to bring along some change. Well, I've thought about that when you talked, and you also talked about experience that is 10 years back in time. And now things have changed in the past years. A lot has changed, I would say. That's how I perceive it. And well, although this may have changed only in certain bubbles, but it has not reached out to society as a whole. It's not a theme that the wide range in society has embraced. But there are discourses about that, and that's why we are here on the panel where the Goethe-Institut has said, well, they want a panel on masculinity. How do you perceive these discourses?
Anil. Of course, you can just answer if you want to, and if you don't say anything, then I might directly address a person. But I first have to process what you just said. Something that I realize in political discussions is that we're talking about a crisis of masculinity. But from a scientific point of view, that is actually completely obsolete. Because when we look at this term of masculinity and what we associate with it, and if we also understand it as a performance, not as something that you're born with born with a certain man box, masculinity has always been a crisis because the social conditions are constantly changing. So when we're talking about a crisis of masculinity, something that we see in big newspapers, for instance, then from my position, I think that it's a crisis of white masculinity. And I think that's something that we shouldn't forget. Now, there's, of course, Connell's mentioned rigor on masculinity. It's a white, cis, able-bodied, rich, wealthy masculinity, which is seen as a norm. And that's the kind of society that we're living in. But I personally can't fulfill this norm, which is why I'm under it. Or, I don't fulfill it as a person that is read by others, as a Turkish or Muslim person. So there's not really a crisis. There's just a dynamic change, and also, as such, a dynamic of the performance of masculinity. As you just mentioned in the beginning, we talked earlier about, Harry Styles, Timothée Chalamet, which is called hybrid masculinity in science. So those people, men that are usually read as masculine, are not afraid of also being seen as a bit of gender fluid. And some people say, oh, well, now we're really kicking patriarchy in the balls. But no matter what, masculinity will always remain masculinity, and people will try and protect their privileges. So from a critical masculinity perspective, I think that, it is important to say as a hetero man, well, we're actually also not doing that well. We're also being discriminated, and some politicians say, yes, there's mobbing against men. Yes, it's a very interesting and dangerous debate because, of course, I think this crisis around masculinity is something that we should be very careful about, because before we say that masculinity is in a crisis, we need to say, well, what are the requirements with regard to masculinity, and why are they so relevant? Why is it relevant for the performance of masculinity to carry a sofa down the stairs? So masculinity is always what you associate with it, but there's, of course, also a political system that protects a certain performance of masculinity. I always say that there's no crisis of masculinity. If at all, then there's an orientation crisis of white, cis, hetero men who have lost their place in this new non-binary society, which is good to start. Of course, I don't have anything against white, cis, hetero men, but we need to break this norm, because the large part of men of humankind are not these kind of people. These are kind of different, diverse people. I could talk for much longer, but I think I'm just gonna drink some of my Aperol and then, Mantis, you were just nodding the whole time. Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely agree with you. But I don't really have the perspective of a white hetero cis man, white yes, cis no, and hetero, well, I won't disclose. Well, I personally have the feeling whether there's always talk about a crisis that I'm not really responsible for. At the same time, I would claim that from what other people say, so for instance, men from BIPOC spectrum, they are required to adapt to a white norm, but it's something that I'm not asked to do because I'm already in there. And, in trans spaces, people are often white, on the stage at least, not in the audience. But the majority is, especially in Leipzig, where I'm from, but they're sort of, we see these power structures in marginalized spaces as well. So it's kind of reproduced again and again. So, just because you are discriminated in one way, you're not really responsible anymore for the overall situation. Solidarity among men, responsibility among men, who's doing the work, who's sitting here talking about masculinities and who's organizing it. I think these are questions that, well, I personally think that I expect from white, cis, hetero, body-abled masculinity to, go out of their comfort zone. And I don't mean by that they should just buy nail polish. No, there's a bit more that I would expect. But what I sometimes find a bit difficult is how masculinities, if feminist battles are advancing, that they're taking or allowing themselves to do things that they wouldn't have done 10 years ago. But at the same time, these are also things that trans people are asking for themselves, or everyone else who are not white, heterosexual, cis men have to be especially soft. They have to show that they're not aggressors, and they have to pretend that they're very peaceful and have to endure things. And I, of course, say this from my trans perspective, but I think, there's something that, of course, also applies to many other areas, and it's sometimes difficult to compare. But, alpha masculinities always means that other people have to endure things which causes wounds. And of course, when you want to defend yourself, then you can do it, by maybe, kicking femininity with, that's how you can defend yourself. But, gender roles, from my perspective, I think are often sort of advanced to the advantage of masculinities. Now, what does that mean? Men are allowed to wear jeans and be more masculine, but until men can wear skirts and it's okay, I think we probably still have to wear 50 years. It took a long time for nail polish, for instance, Yeah, but maybe pop culture is maybe a little bit more ahead than our society. Well, I always think of the 1980s, think of how far we were with regard to feminine men with makeup in the 80s, Boy George, and all of these people. So all of these people who took it for granted to be very feminine and to wear a lot of makeup and were, very present in the media. Then, of course, there was the HIV, the AIDS crisis, and, a lot of steps back, so now I think we have to fight for it again. But Marilyn Manson, though, Marilyn isn't Marilyn Manson. Marilyn was from the 80s. That's someone different. I thought you meant Marilyn Manson because of his makeup and a different outfit. No, okay, sorry. I thought you meant Marilyn Manson. No, but I'll show you Marilyn later. I'll show you who that is later. Very blonde, very beautiful. No, but we were just talking about Harry Styles, and I think a couple of years ago there was also a lot of uproar about Pharrell Williams, who the GQ cover was showing himself in very feminine clothes, and he was celebrated, a big deal. And, okay, he shows a kind of new masculinity, but, Pharrell Williams' texts or lyrics, when you look at them, well, they're not very queer, not very feminist, So do you think it's a good development? Do you think these kind of people, do you think that they should be able to present themselves so that other people, can come after them? Or do you think it's just kind of appropriating queer culture that they exploit for their own purposes? Well, I think it would be wrong to say they're not allowed to do that, because everyone is allowed to do everything, and they can, of course, do that. But, of course, it's a performance. It's something that is done for a photo shoot or for a concert to shock people and to say, oh, look, this is what I look like in a dress. I think in the 90s, there were also a couple of, example of artists in dresses by the beach. And, I think, the goal was achieved. We're selling a product that creates a lot of attention. For people who are read as queer, of course, on the street, this is completely different. It's a completely different reality. Who can't afford to go from their house to the taxi and then be driven somewhere else and to be safe the whole time. And of course, that's something that we can point out for sure in this context. Absolutely. Well, I think this is a very interesting debate insofar as it's not just an appropriation of queer culture, as you just mentioned, but also, not necessarily, but, when I look from a cis-hetero perspective at pop culture, Harry Styles or Timothée Chalamet, they can do that because they have money and they are musicians, and or some people are musicians and they sell a product. But there's also a reproduction of racist mechanisms. And I think there's a lot of science around that, actually, because it's often privileged white men who are allowed to do that, to do something that marginalized men have done before. They're allowed to do that, and they can benefit from everything that has been done before them. Everyone's talking about Harry Styles, everyone's talking about Timothée Chalamet, but of course there was also Prince in the 80s, right? And we don't really talk about that very much. Or Harry Cruz, who talked a lot about sexual violence against men. They're not really, they don't really come up in these debates. But Harry Styles, all of a sudden, is progressive masculinity, even though in the 1980s we had the progressive performance of masculinity. But all of a sudden, Harry Styles is, cute cis men. That's what he is read as, and now he's on the forefront of new masculinity, and that is very, very dangerous because it also reproduces white privileges. And I think that's something that we definitely need to mention in that context. We mustn't forget that. And that's something that I sort of find difficult in debates, especially debates that are dominated by white people. And for me, it would be very interesting to say, well, of course you can do that. You can, can walk on a stage and dress whatever you want. But how many, and, show queer flags on stage, but how many queer people do you actually employ in your team? Or how many queer people do you deal with if there's no cameras? That's something that I would find very interesting to ask. Now, a funny anecdote, I wrote reviews for a magazine, and for the new album of Cool Savage, I had to go to Cool Savage's management. And would you have thought that the management of Cool Savage is basically a gay person is part of the management of Cool Savage? I personally actually wouldn't have thought that, because I thought that I would go to a very, into a very toxic environment, with straight rapper dudes. I don't know if it's him or the other, but, I had to go there very early one morning, and Mel Beats, who is responsible for that, told me once that they actually had to let go someone because he was too queer, and then they called me instead, and then I came there and it was like, hi, so I don't know if that was really what they wanted. It doesn't make it better. Yeah, but, maybe there have been changes because, of course, this happened a few years ago, but it's a completely different story. Of course, we don't want to, say that Cool Savage is fantastic because he employs one gay man. Well, but you just said that the debates are often led by white people. What do you mean, more in detail? Who is leading these debates? I can't really see the audience very clearly, but I have the impression that there's a lot more women here in the audience than men. Why do you think that is? Generally. Because I think very often these debates are led by women, and that women are looking at these issues. Cementers. Well, I think that they have a higher conscience of responsibility, that people do more care work, more reproduction work, and I think it's a lot more natural for them, maybe, all of these white anti-fa dudes and their house projects, they're in conflict about socialism, anarchism, communism, and, the Middle East conflict. I think that's what is the case currently, and I think it will be the same in the years to come. I think they should cooperate with SpaceX and do a commune on the moon, so that would bring us ahead in the left scene as well. I drink to that even though I have to top up my glass. Or Elon Musk, even if he didn't get into Berghain. Is this water or what is it? Gin? I don't know. Can you maybe pour some of that into here because it's very, very strong? Thank you. Not too much, please. But we have a second bottle, so if you need more, let me know. So that would be my reply. No, gender equality is, of course, it affects women. They want something, they're demanding something, but at the same time, I think that they have, a huge sense of responsibility also with regard to men, because they don't really want to put people under pressure maybe sometimes. And I think sometimes people have a personal interest to listen to marginalized masculinities, how that is actually then integrated into political discourse in debates. If, I'm doing a rap concert and it's called the concert, then I'm not really excited about that. That doesn't mean that I don't like the acronym or the abbreviation useless, but I think the progressive or the left scene has a huge problem if they can't call a rap concert, but they want to use gender marketing to market that rap concert. Well, I think that's problematic. Rap in Germany doesn't have a high cultural value. It still sort of has a lot of associations with precarious environments, but it's rap is of course is becoming more and more white, and a large part of the rap scene is seen as aggressive and as masculine and as kind of homogenized. But rap is very heterogeneous. That's just a fact. And if left movements can't call a rap concert, if it's not a white cis man, then, or if it's not a cis man, then I think it's a huge problem, because it shows that rap is culturally not getting the importance that it should become, neither in mainstream nor in the scene. And it's connected to the fact that there's a racification, it's people who live in precarious circumstances, and it's a sort of culture which Gabi and Jochen, so very typical German names, don't want to have in the Schauspielhaus, a big theater in Berlin. And Annalena, for instance, doesn't see it like Gabi or Maximilian or vice versa, but they only listen to rap since there's Crow, which is a popular white rapper in Germany. Antifa. People who are part of the Antifa haven't listened to rap that long, and before that they've listened to punk, really. However, the wheel of time keeps turning, and we now have alternative rap that is very exciting indeed, but they are not usually called rap concerts but flinter concerts. But, well, that you say there are different kind of that there's a different kind of rap music. Rap is the most successful music genre of today, and queer rap has always existed, just as there have always been women in rap. But, you know, the mainstream, have, because of the numbers, the sales numbers, things have kind of been portrayed different because it was a cis men with street rap. That was what people kind of perceived as rap. Now that there are these kind of different genre types of rap, that are receiving more attention, that is, of course, fantastic. Just to conclude what I just said, well, when I talk with queers and with rappers about raps. Why? Because if rap magazines ask me, I'm supposed to write about, talk about trans issues, and if queer magazines, they ask, I'm supposed to say how misogynist rap music is. It's the same request that I get every single year, and people don't have any bad intentions. But, rap, we need to get ahead. Of course, rap isn't really bad masculinity, even though there are, of course, many problematic dudes, but not more than, in folk music, for instance, or country music, really. Yes, of course, it's of course a topic that we could talk for ages about. It's the same for me, really. But, it's also the kind of, people think, something is this or that, and then it's put into a drawer and they don't look at it in more detail, which is very unfortunate. Would you like to add something? No, I'm good. Anil, you're also ambassador. Would you like to talk a bit about your work? Well, this whole ambassador thing has a very binary title, non-binary title. I'm he for she ambassador. Oh, it has a very binary title. The title is he, she ambassador, and I didn't choose this title. That was Emma Watson. So UN Women Germany has a he for she ambassador program. UN Women Germany has a he for she ambassador program. So this he for she movement, well, I have the perspective of a hetero man, and I usually deal with men who are asked by their girlfriends to come to do workshops with me. And I ask people, what do you associate with feminism? Well, and they say, men are trash and people hate men. That's very often what I hear, and that's where I start, And this he for she program asks especially hetero men to join women in this fight for gender equality. It's, of course, a very large goal. How it actually happens on the ground is a completely different thing. And I offer workshops and presentations in these kind of contexts, or in contexts where I realize that people have so much money, but so little sensitivity with regard to certain issues. And, well, of course, I could say, here 10 tips of how you can become a feminist overnight. These are the kind of requests that I often get. Or, people ask me, do you have 3 tips for what needs to be happen? I can do that, and I can just take my money and then leave, fine. But from my own personal experience, I think it is, let me put it differently, because this is a little bit problematic. But, you probably know the phenomenon when you talk with men about therapy. It's kind of a meme. When you say you go with men into therapy, and this workshop is kind of like therapy, they say, no, I'm not doing therapy. But when you say it's coaching, or if you say, if you do this, you're becoming, you're gonna be a better person afterwards. On the one hand, of course, I don't want to reproduce these kind of stereotypes, but on the same hand, I also, of course, I want to get them to engage. I talk to them about definitions and how we would define men, and that's something that they're actually interested in. So it's a question of how you how you can approach these people in the right way, and that's how it started with me too. Because in the beginning I said, feminism is something for men; it's something that I have nothing to do with. But then I realized, well, what does masculinity mean? Who are your role models? I went to school in Neukölln, a district in Berlin, and of course, or I once went to a school in the Neukölln district in Berlin. We were talking about artists, actors, and who also show soft sides. We're talking about racism. We're talking about family. So the question is, who do you talk about, where about these topics, and how do you get people to think about what masculinity means, and then say, well, that's, what you're doing is sort of highly feminist shit on a theoretical level. And then they say, oh no, I'm stuck. And then they say, well, I might as well be here. Just to put it in very simple terms. So, this ambassador program invites people, and it's 5 other colleagues of mine who are involved in it, and we're trying to recognize feminist battles and to recognize these spaces. Sometimes, I have a bit of a problem with this claim. I don't want to say that I'm, the biggest feminist in the world. I try and be an ally. I think that's the most important thing. The work that I do is feminist work at the end of the day, but it's not. I don't want to take that position. I don't want to assume that position. It's not mine to take. Kollega, going to back German rapper Kollega also offers these kind of coachings, right? But there are also men, they go there, they pay a lot of money for several weeks. And I say, well, the whole money that you spent there, you really would have been able to look for, a therapist. I like all the memes surrounding men in therapy, but, it's kind of crazy how we're stuck in these gender roles, but how effective they still are. You just said it's mainly hetero men who find it problematic to go into therapy, but I think for gay men it's the same. In my podcast, we talk about therapy. I talk about my own therapy. I invite people, and did one special podcast episode during the pandemic about a psychotherapist and there's a lot of gay men who write to me and who were able to shed their fear by listening to this podcast to actually go that step. So I think even for gay men, it takes a lot of convincing to, to get them to look for help, to go and look for a therapist. So I think that also applies for gay men.
So you have said goodbye to the pronoun he? No, not at all. It doesn't exist anymore for you? No, that's a misunderstanding. The press review that you wrote was Barbie Breakout was a photo as drag and said, man, we invite men. And I said, no, not quite. I don't feel as a man, first of all, but that was wrong for me. Me, drag, and my female artist's name, and then he, and you invite men, that was wrong for me, and that's what I didn't accept. But the female pronoun out of that works well. Male pronoun, sometimes a bit difficult for me. In the working context, it's no problem. That's normal even. But when I select it, I present myself or introduce myself as Barbie, but I don't protest immediately when I was called he. Barbie means what? Well, many drag artists have that distinction between the artistic figure and they themselves, and I have never had that. So that distinction that used to exist, because for quite a while I've always tried to practice straight acting, and not to have a distinction so that I am accessible still in the gay scene, but it's a huge topic. If you're read as too female in the gay milieus, it's very quickly over with your plans for the future. So I've tried to have that distinction here, but after years of performing as a male person, even on stage and in personal life, I said, well, it looks good as a drag queen, but you've got that female soul. And I said, no, I can't. And I thought, well, okay, I don't have to do as if, so I can just sort of drop that wall of distinction. And it was not consciously, it was subconsciously. For years, I have integrated everything that I spoke about before, and now there is no such distinction anymore between Barbie and me. It's all the same now. And there are not lots of transformations when I'm drag. I see that with others. There's a role. So we had a podcast activity yesterday, and we produced a live podcast. And Tatjana, who in real life is a gay man, has a role in drag, plays that role. She put up her makeup and she was on stage, and she was a different person altogether, a different individual, and that's what I don't do anymore. So it's the same person, just prettier. Okay, but you, of course, trigger when you're in drag, you trigger when you are Barbie, and your experience is more extreme as compared to your experience as Timo. So how do people respond to that or react to that? You said earlier that you cannot go from A to B, or it's difficult to go out on the street as drag, and you mentioned that. Well, before, I have had a lot of experience with violence as a teenager. I was really beaten up frequently, and I was not in drag, but I was visibly queer. I was wearing skirts and lots of jewelry, high heels, etc. in the 1990s. So we had these main buffaloes. And, well, I was beaten up for that frequently. And that's a fear that I still feel inside of me. So I read every room, every space that I go into. When I'm queen, the visibility is something that I'm fully aware of. And then I can decide how to dress on that very day. And some things are visible when I just dress normally, it seems. So I carry that along with me. And in drag, it's maximally visible. So I'm already tall with high heels. I'm even taller, and then the hair on top. So it's a whole of a presence. And the reactions are not always positive. But, and as a result of my experience with violence, I try to avoid that. So if I can afford it, I take a taxi, or I ask some friends to pick me up, take me there. So I would never go on the underground as drags. It's too dangerous. And positive things as well that you observe, that people are more easily accessible, or heterosexual men, for example. Yeah, but honestly, I find it striking that when you're in a club, for example, or not just a club, but in situations where you spend more time with heterosexual men, then there is always a point when they start talking about their problems and sort of confide in you, because I think, well, you can confide into you, but then you spend half an hour talking about personal problems with that person, if you know what I mean, because they think, well, men cannot talk to their buddies about that, and I ask, well, why don't you talk to your buddy who is just next door? Why do you tell it to me, a person you met just half an hour ago? So the problems you have with your girlfriend or with yourself or with whatever, as soon as heterosexual men check that you are gay, or that they become softer, or they show themselves as more vulnerable persons. Do you have that same experience in drag, or even more extreme experience? Well, different experiences, yes. On the one hand, drag, well, I was quickly aware of the fact that I am sort of loudspeaker or megaphone for things that I take out into the world. I recorded that Russia video in front of kind of transphobia in Russia that I wanted to protest against. If I had done that out of drag, nobody would have been interested in that, and people would have asked, well, why is that guy a bit confused and hurts himself? And now then it was something that went viral, and people talked about that. It's like a power of drag that you can use as a lever in order to reinforce and strengthen your message and reach out to more people. It's like a catalyst if you use it, if you want to use it like that. Many of us don't have that political will or strive towards political messages, but I do. I like to open up. People tell me lots of things, what you've just spoke about, but I've got lots of heterosexual men who know exactly that there is not a cis woman underneath, and they still have very clear interests and want to pursue them. And that, of course, is also one side of it. Well, it's interesting because it happens frequently. Yeah, I find that interesting too. Well, we already touched upon it, but I would like to take it up again. It seems that many people still have the feeling that feminism is something against women. Well, can we talk about that briefly? What do you think about that? How do you see that? What's your view on that? So that we sort of, well, from the right wing of feminism to sort of do something on behalf of women, while that men, but even women say, well, there are women that are that they don't need any feminism, and then men say, well, yeah, the ladies given some advantages or privileged, or men have the fear that someone takes a piece of the cake away from them. And well, my feeling is a bit that this sort of the power relations reversed, if you want. One can say men and women are exactly the same. Now look into other countries where the situation is far worse. So it's said like that. If you don't want to really talk about patriarchal situations here, or patriarchy in general, yeah. And then there is equality, equal opportunities for men and women, or the previous assumption that women are sometimes more privileged because men have difficulties controlling their instincts or impulses, and that, for me, goes into the direction of male culture. Men are depicted as controlled by their instincts. I have a feeling that this is not true either, and women grow up with that high level of responsibility. I would explain like that with that responsibility there's also the wish to influence situations or to be able to control situations which then actually don't control. While you've got some male body that gazes at you on the underground, so that's something that you can get for granted. So asking, what are you wearing? So this influenceability of situations is surged in that the sexism, experience of sexism that you have made is seen as something that is a sort of power instrument, because you can influence via choosing your clothes, the way how people see you, but that's not true. And so it's sort of mechanisms that do exist that many women could imagine that via this traditional role and beyond, they sort of take a higher position and pseudo-position because that's the role, which is actually the other part. It takes the two sides or two parts in that heterogeneity, and without the woman it would not work, of course, logically. So that's where they look for a value, where they see the value, and dependencies can be explained by that. And of course you don't have a pension as high as the one of the man, but if you want to live differently, then of course you fall into poverty in old age as a woman, and Porsche is gone. Well, that's... same goes for Maximilians, Annelinas, etc. So I see that aspect. And then it said, well, feminism is sort of intervention into the natural role of women, or transfeminism was against biological order of society and would silence women's discussions about menstruation, etc. But it's just a matter of where you speak about that. If you're a menstruation influencer, everyone can opt if they want to subscribe to your post or not. But if you go into that LGBT, etc. space, then you need to be aware of the fact that there may be trans people there that have also experienced certain violations or have been harmed. And this is something where I cannot give a full answer, because I don't understand why feminism should be something against women. I don't understand that. I don't understand it either. But it would be, that's the sort of explanation if I were to talk among my parents' friends about feminism, but that would be the sort of answer I would get back, because we would not need feminism, or why we would not need it here, but elsewhere yes, but here no, we wouldn't need it. And then you have another topic on the agenda straight away, and have to sort of find the balance here and try to figure out where you stand. But that's where, according to my experience, that line of argument I don't quite see. But maybe I can't really explain it. So what can we do in order to reduce or eliminate these patriarchal structures? What else needs to be done? Was the simplest question that you've just kept until the end. What do we need to do? Well, you're much smarter than I am, so please give an answer. Try to give an answer. No, just linking up with what you've just said. The name is Trigger linked, but there's second wave feminists with certain good magazines that are quite well known. And Alice Schwarzer, yes, they argue in a similar way. They say, well, the type of feminism that is now being lived and that we're striving for would open gates and doors for men that come here and then harass white women. This is a sort of feminism that puts at risk white women of a certain age that grew up with feminism. So no, Bellux quotes a certain psychologist and said, we live with a heightened view of everything that is connotated as masculine, and we'll live with that. And headlines, and in Spain there's a lot happening right now regarding different reproductive rights, but not only in Spain, but in Norway as well, where laws, gender marketing was prohibited. And one thing that we should have in the focus is that we need that in Germany as well. There's an initiative, Golden at Zaunpfahl, where I'm involved, where every year we give a negative award for absurd gender marketing. And I ask the question to all of you now. Emma has a market share of more than 50%, and you were all at the DM shop. If you all have all the fruities, white colored and colored things that are connotated female, and everything that is dark, a chainsaw is blue, and this imagination that you're on a river in Canada, you just sort of take that salmon out of the river with your bare hand. That's how I imagine it. And psychologists, interestingly, have pointed to that for quite a while already, that we're strongly influenced by that, and this is why the biological patriarchy starts. So my concrete proposal would be, beyond these relatively simple things that are in the coalition agreement, that we should do that. Gender marketing should be prohibited, because that would mean, or not next year, but well, according to the Global Gender Gap Report, we need 268 years to close the gender gaps, but that would be one important point where we should take action, and there are lots of things that need to be abolished. And I would invite all of you. In the left scene, I also see the problem that men want to take part in the feminist or that sort of discourses, and I take part in that, but I think gender as a category of ruling should be abolished. But in order to get to that point, we need these low access offerings reaching out to men and make them understand that feminism is not against men, but it also says that you can wear what you would like to wear, that this relevance of male performance is less seen by men. I'm still fully in there, and every day I try to do it, and I feel that, well, wearing a skirt, well, or a dress, no, it didn't fit my outfit, but I should have worn a different outfit and looked into my wardrobe and said, well, but that again is something where gender marketing should be abolished. That is one of the root of our problems, and capitalism, etc. Later.
Nochmal einen kleinen Sprung zu dir, Barbie.
Jumping over to you, Barbie. You published 2 books, one book that I wrote twice. So one book that you wrote twice, Tragisch aber geil 2.0. You tell us about your life with ups and downs, very intimate, how you share your life with us, and you tell us also how you became Barbie and the struggles that you've been through in your young age and as a young adult. What would you say, or to reword it, can you see for yourself what that struggle, that performance pressure of masculinity that you have described at the beginning tonight as well, what it did to your psyche? Can you be a bit more specific about that? What has it done to you psychologically or mentally? Well, when you read the entire book, well, you don't have to read it actually, but it's worthwhile, yeah. That would be the moment, bodybreakout.com. You can buy that. The struggle with masculinity is one of the smallest in my biography. it is a struggle and it's present, and it is still true that I've got days where I say, well, I do some nonsense, and then afterwards I ask myself, oh no, well, I can eat everything. And then I cry, spend 3 hours in the restroom crying. Well, masculinity, my identification or difficulties to identify as a man, and how the male environment responded to me has been a problem for a long time. So my relationship with my father was very difficult for a long time, but that's not the main sort of line in my life that I say, oh, I suffered from patriarchy, but not more than anybody else, I would say. And Sir Mantis, I would like to know from you once more, as a trans man, are there other forms of challenges? Well, I'm sure there are different forms of challenges, but what are the specific challenges as a trans man in our society? Well, you need to validate yourself permanently. Once people know that you're trans, it is really difficult, it's fatiguing, and if they don't know, then when it's about primary school boys, etc., you have to have been part of the team, or myth that I heard, but nobody was there. We just heard about it and you've just seen it. So I feel there are experiences that I have not made, and I'm grateful and very happy that I did not take part in these boys' things after sports activities or in the changing rooms after sports, etc. So there's always a certain pressure. It has always been there. Once you're trans, you feel that pressure. But even if you don't tell people, then you feel that pressure because you walk through this world or society with the normative idea that everybody is cis. Well, that's the point that makes it so difficult. And that puts pressure upon you when it's about body experience, physical experience, similar things. And I would know, even if people were to think that I was cis and I want to talk about man stories, man experiences, then want to know how I live, how I feel, and how nice moments with my girlfriend look like, and they don't know what to answer once they know or once I tell them. So therefore, I sometimes don't know how to answer these questions or how to respond myself. But I feel once the information is there that I'm trans, then there's a sort of response that is full of expectation and not very sensitive from society, where a lot is expected. So I felt also when sort of passing is something that you sort of make your way as a man, and people can deal with how I look in a much better way when they think that I'm cis, when they know that I'm cis. They always think that I'm small because there is a problem with my chromosomes, etc. My father is just 2-3 centimeters taller than I am. So society thinks that trans men are the feminized version of their fathers, which is actually not true. It's simply not true. So whatever is released in terms of genes, I don't know, I'm more masculine than my father. I've become so, and that surprises cis men because I don't assume that this could be the case. And it shows me time and time again that the idea of what trans men look like, there are so many ideas, and you don't correspond to that idea. It's always a negative response. This sentence, well, I would have never thought that you're trans. I heard that quite frequently. Again, you see that it only mirrors that the way how people think that trans people are, that you realize immediately when you see them, etc. And once they learn, these people, that I'm trans, and I said, well, I could have thought so, might have thought, well, it's sort of a certain factor or a certain size, but that's not true. I feel empowered when I see men that are 1.60 meters tall that are randomly at the bus stop. I look at them for a minute from behind. I hope they don't see it, because I'm then so happy that someone else is smaller than I am. Well, that clearly shows what impact it has time and time again. And in this is a normal situation that is then turned into a situation where you have to justify that once the information is out, and to be trans means to deal with information. You are a sort of dealer, and you need to see what you want in that situation, what can be the consequences, what can be the impact, and you need to find out what could have which consequence, and there will always be a consequence, and that is marginalization, which distinguishes trans men of cis men at that point, that you always have a consequence, not to out yourself as what you are or to out yourself as what you are, and you need to find out what the consequences that you might prefer in a certain situation. It's a simply cognitive process that that they're constantly in. So it is not true that trans men just pass and that's it. You will never cease to be trans. It never ends. And that's nice, because this also leads to experience that I would not like to give up. So sure that I'm so happy with my identity. If I were to choose, if I wanted to be cis man or trans man, I wanted to select the trans man once more. Yes, that's nice.
Annie,
Anil, you worked with the Goethe-Institut over the last few years for a project in India, which was also about masculinity, wasn't it? You looked at masculinities in India and what kind of masculinities there are in India. Would you like to say a couple of words on the project? Yes, it was a joint project with the Goethe-Institut, Bangladesh and India. With Sesha Arora, a journalist, I talked about the performance of masculinity. And, well, we were both non-white people, and we looked at masculinities. I looked at it from a person with a migration background as a Muslim person, and she from a Muslim country. And, we first of all shared our experiences, because she knows context in India. She has family in India. And we looked at Muslim masculinities from an intersectional perspective, because the debates in India are completely different. They're also a little bit stricter. Muslim men are highly problematized. I think she mentioned a term, Muslim jihad or something, meaning that that we saw that there were intersectionalities between these different topics, and also had to do with these men's sexualities. So it was about, I think there's a deconstruction of this kind of sexuality in Germany. We were just mentioning Ali Schwarzer, and in their rhetorics, but also from second wave feminist rhetorics, I don't think we just saw that in Cologne, New Year's, when a lot of women were attacked, but it was, there's the term ethno-sexism. I don't know, do people know the Lord Mayor of Tübingen, Lord Boris Palmer? There were a lot of refugees coming to Tübingen, and he was scared about the blonde daughters of professors. He's a member of the Green Party, right? No, at the moment, not anymore, but, but I won't go into detail here. And ethno-sexism means exactly what you just said, that we're looking at we don't look at patriarchy in Germany. We say, oh, the situation is much worse in Turkey and in Russia, and, don't even bother. And, I think there are a lot of connections also with non-white masculinities, but we're a problem, and we're being generalized, exoticized, fetishized, until we provide certain value to society, and they tell me, well, you are well integrated, or you're a danger for society. Now, not just it doesn't mean that you're very passionate or you're desexualized, but they say, you're living in a ghetto, you're living in a parallel society. All of these different things have a social reality that create a construction of masculinity. I've made this experience myself, this fetishizing or exoticizing experience. But when I was 15, of course, I was cooler than the average German, because, I used Pretty Ricky, so, I had to be more sexual. but of course, it was also kind of racism, right? Because when I was in a changing room with other boys and I showed off my chest hair, now I think it's so sexy, and I think that the average German, they didn't really like it. They were probably jealous, right? Probably they were very, very jealous. But what I mean when I say that is that in a certain way, I have to present a certain value to society, and other than that, I'm dangerous, I'm uncontrollable, I'm wild, I'm savage, which of course is also related to social debates such as Orientalism. But, I would of course like to say Anna, who loves to dance Latin American dances, who watches the Eurovision Song Contest. Of course, in 8th grade, I don't say, I just dance salsa. And of course, my average German friends wouldn't have liked it. But, I'm currently in the process trying to say that it doesn't matter to me, because I'm aware that society is doing something with me, but it can't affect me in such a way that, yes, there's also a sort of counter performance, which is a new act every day. But I also want to be very transparent here. I'm read as a cis hetero man, and of course that is also connected to certain privileges. So of course, I can also take, one day and say, today I don't want to fight against patriarchy. Today, I have that privilege, and that is of course a much larger debate. But there are certain magazines that should certainly be abolished, and you of course know which ones I'm talking about. I just heard that we now have to end or come to the end of the session. So I have a sort of last question for you. What would be most important for you with regard to the future with regard to the future and the future of masculinity and the debates, how we need to have them in the future? Do they need to be done differently? Or what is, important? Or are there other things that are important for you that we didn't talk about today? Are there any sort of remarks that you have? Cementas, I'll start with you. What's important for me? Well, what is important for me? A lot. Well, I, first and foremost, would like us to have a society that listens. Of course, it sounds very basic, and everyone says, yes, of course, I understand. Yeah, I see it. But it's something that you need to remind people over and over again, including myself. There is no person who only has privileges, and no person who has absolutely zero privileges. But I would like to ask, the average German what he or she thinks about that. But, it's extremely important for me that extreme masculinity is understood as a system of hierarchies, and that that we understand that marginalized masculinities are, of course, privileged to a certain extent, but, of course, also provide a lot of, possibilities for projections with regard to expectations, but also certain isms. And I think it's extremely important to have a dialogue with regard to that, because otherwise we won't make any advances. And for me, it's important that the view with regard to trans masculinities is less prejudiced, and that trans persons are not expected to be the better men, because that excludes us to have our own experiences with that, but that we also are not constantly being controlled and have to prove that we're real men. And I would like to be protected by society. I would like for society to be willing to have the debate about trans men being real men, and that I don't have to constantly perform it. I don't have to articulate it constantly. I would just like to have this aspect or this fact be understood by everyone, and that that can also be a process, that there can be different experiences of masculinity. Just like I said in the beginning, for instance, on the one hand, a role that gives you a certain security, but also a certain crisis of identity, because it asks a lot of you and it takes a lot from you. And I've reached a point where, I like talking about sexism in public and to show solidarity. I like this role. I like to use it for a lot of things, and you do it, fantastically. And I like the power that this role has. I want to use it for the sake of equality, but at the same time, I also ask other people to use their role and power for equality. There are a lot of things that I would wish for, but everything is complete. Is an illusion and won't change over the next few years. But one thing that I'm observing and that really concerns me at the moment, but has over the last few years already, and that is that our attempts to try and attack the origin of this, where children are being taught that they're not allowed to do this or that, but if they need to grow into these kind of men, into the alpha male, etc. There are attempts to soften this and to show children, oh, you don't have to be like that, and you also, it doesn't matter if you're different, if you're like me, you don't have to kill yourself, for instance. That's not a reason to do that, and currently it's kind of pathologized and it's pedophilized, and people are telling us that we're doing certain things with these children because we want to do certain things with them, and that's disgusting. That's absolutely disgusting. And what we often forget in this debate is that we, people who are promoting these kind of things, are these kind of children. We used to be these kind of children who went through these experiences and who know from their own experience how horrible it is and how important it is that as a kid you have allies who say it's absolutely okay the way you are, don't commit suicide, it's going to get better, you're allowed to be as you are, you're allowed to go dancing if you want to, everything is easy, and it's very difficult for me at the moment to take part in this discussion because this basic assumption of sort of these these negative assumptions that people have about us, that's very difficult for me to stomach. And that's something that I would hope that with the help of everyone who has a voice, that these people use their voice, that they don't leave the public space to assholes, that they're also our allies, and that they say, well, you can just shut up. And no one wants to fuck children, everything is great. We actually just want to help them. Anil. I can only agree with what the other two said. Now, from my cis-hetero perspective, I think gender-specific violence is very important to me. We've talked about different definitions of masculinity, and I think that toxic masculinity is something. I find this term I'm a bit critical with regard to this term because it assumes a sort of requirements with regard to masculinity, and because I think it's important, but I think for a lot of men it's sometimes difficult to stomach. But I think at the end, men can also say, well, I don't really do body shaming and I don't commit sexual violence, so I'm a good man. So I think they think that there's a good unproblematic masculinity that doesn't reproduce these things. But as long as you still work 40 hours a week, as long as you still, reproduce all of these kind of things, I think this toxic masculinity won't be dissolved in society and lead to less disadvantages for society, but also for everyone's environment. And so I think we should think further than the term toxic masculinity. There's a huge anti-feminist. Susanne Kaiser, political masculinity is one tip. These anti-feminists are also racist somehow. So I think we need to think these things kind of together, because all aggressors that all of these, they were all racist and anti-feminists. And I think it's important to fight more strongly against anti-feminists and not say, okay, we need to listen to them. I think there's a sort of threshold. No, we can't listen to them. They just have to shut up. That's the end of the story. Thank you very much for all of your very smart ideas on this topic. It was a huge pleasure for me. Thank you very much for hosting the session. Thank you very much, Barbie Breakout. Thank you very much, Fikre Anil Altintash. Thank you very much, Samantas. And thank you very much for coming and listening, and enjoy the rest of the festival.